everyone, and welcome back to the Bakewell Being Kitchen. I'm Ella, the founder and director of Bakewell Being, and today I'm going to show you how to make our signature bake, the cherry Bakewell tart. So for this one you're going to work with pastry, frangipane and icing. It's a really great one for a little challenge, but if you take your time with it, you'll find it easier than you might think. Here they are. They're super cute, and again, a perfect little bake for a tea and talk or a tea party. So pop your oven on to 160 degrees and I'll take you through it step by step. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to start off with a 12-hole cupcake or muffin tin, and I'm going to butter the insides. For this I like to use the plastic kind of paintbrush because it's so much easier to get into all the nooks and crannies. Just going to pop that to one side, and I'm going to grab my ready rolled pastry. So this is shortcrust pastry, which you're going to need for this particular bake. I've left it out of the fridge for about half an hour just to soften up slightly, which it instructs you to do on most boxes of this stuff. Of course you can make your own shortcrust pastry, but it's a little bit tricky, and I'm just showing you how you can do it much quicker and much easier. And I'm now going to grab my round cutter of about 10 centimetres in diameter, and I'm going to use this jagged edge because I think that it just makes the top of the pastries look much cuter, but of course you can also use a plain edge. So I'm just going to go ahead and start cutting some circles out of this pastry, and then I'm going to take my pastry circle and just place it into the tin. Just pressing it down nice and gently. You don't want it to stretch too much, but you do want it to get as close to the bottom of the tin as possible. And don't worry about your top being a bit messy, because if it comes out really messy from the oven, you can just cut that off with a knife. And then I'm going to do the same for the rest of the holes. So you should get about 6 pastry circles out of one sheet. So I'm just going to roll that back up and grab my second sheet to do the rest. And there we go. And now I'm going to grab my greaseproof paper, and I'm going to draw around my cutter, which I just used, 12 times to make little greaseproof paper circles, which I'm going to cover the pastry cases with. So a little tip for this is if you just draw one at the top of the sheet and then cut a strip, if you then fold that over, for this size you'll only be able to fold it once, and then cut around, then you'll get 2 for the price of 1. So once I've got 12, I'm going to layer them up on top of each other, and then I'm going to cut some incisions in towards the centre of the circles, all the way around the edges. So it should now look like you've got lots of greaseproof paper flowers. Then I'm going to turn those upside down and just press them in to the cases. Those incisions are just going to help your greaseproof paper to fit really nicely inside the little cups. And the last thing to do before these can go in the oven is fill them with a little bit of rice. I'm just going to use about a tablespoon in each. And this is just going to make sure that your pastry bakes really flat and it doesn't bubble up at all in the centre. If you don't have rice, you could also use small pastas to go in here, anything that's just going to weigh it down. You can also buy baking beans, which you can reuse for things like this, but they're a little bit expensive and quite hard to get your hands on at the moment. And I'm then going to pop these in the oven for 10 minutes. Now while those are in the oven, I am going to make the filling of frangipane, which is a sweet type filling, a little bit sponge-like, and it's always flavoured with almonds, so an absolute signature of the Bakewell tart. I'm going to start by taking 120 grams of soft baking butter and 120 grams of golden caster sugar. And I'm going to start to combine these together. My butter has been out at room temperature all morning, so it's really, really soft, and it just makes it so much easier to combine the sugar with. And I'm just going to beat that together really quickly to make it as soft and fluffy as possible. And then I'm going to move on to the egg. So I'm going to take 1 egg and I'm going to give that a light whisk with a fork. And then add that in along with 1 tablespoon of plain flour. And that little amount of flour is literally just going to stop this mixture from curdling. And finally, I'm going to add 110 grams of ground almonds. And I'm going to fold this into the mixture. So just like what you would normally do with your flour, this is going to be a nice slow folding motion where you just take from the bottom and spoon over the top. Because you want to keep as many air bubbles in there as possible and you don't want to beat them all out. And there's your frangipane mix. So our pastry cases have just had 10 minutes in the oven. Here they are. And what I'm going to do now is just remove the cases and the rice and then pop them in the oven for another 10 minutes. So if you try to grab as many sort of petals of the greaseproof paper flour as possible, then it should just enclose the rice in a little parcel and be much easier to remove it all in one go. But don't worry if it leaves a little bit of rice behind, like that. And do be really careful when you do this because the tray and the pastries will still be hot. So don't worry about these little remains of rice and the bits that are inside because you can just dust those off at the end. So these are going to go back in the oven for another 10 minutes. So here the pastry cases are fresh out the oven. Now even though I have a fan oven, every oven is slightly different with its flow of heat. So you can see here that the sort of bottom 6 on the right hand side are slightly better cooked than the ones at the back. That's okay. What I'm going to do is when I put them in next is I'm just going to turn it round so we get a kind of an even bake. I'm going to leave these here to cool for about 5 to 10 minutes just until they're cool to the touch. And once they are cool, they should be really easy to just slip out of the tin like this. So I'm just going to turn it upside down into a bowl just to get rid of the rest of that rice. Just give it a little tap. This one's got a lot of rice in. And then just dust your finger around the inside just to make sure you've got rid of all of it, because a crunchy piece of burnt rice in your cherry Bakewell tart is not exactly what you want. And again, just making sure that your tin is now cool to touch. You can start getting the rice off of there if you've got any that you need to get rid of. Once all the rice is gone, I'm then just going to add a teaspoon of strained cherry jam into each of the cases. So you want to try and get about a level teaspoon or just over. You should need about 90 grams for this. So if you run out, then just take a bit from the other cases because they might have a bit too much. And then I'm just going to use the back of my spoon just to smooth it down a little bit to cover the bottom of the case. Perfect. And following that, I'm going to put a teaspoon of frangipane on top of the cherry jam. You want this to cover the whole of the layer of jam. You'll need a sort of heaped teaspoon. Don't want it to come too close to the top, and you just want to leave a little bit of room for it to rise up level with the top of your cases. Perfect, and then these are going to go back in the oven for another 20 minutes. So these are now fresh out of the oven, and I'm just going to leave them to cool for about 5 to 10 minutes, and the frangipane will start to sink slightly, and that's going to give us a nice flat base to put the icing on the top. So while these are cooling, I'm just going to pop them over to one side, and I'm going to grab my bowl back, and I'm going to sieve 200 grams of icing sugar into my large bowl. I'm then going to pop 2 tablespoons of water into the icing sugar. And with a little mix, that's just going to turn this from a powder form into a really nice spreadable icing. I'm going to give this a good mix to get rid of any lumps of icing sugar in there. And then we've got the perfect consistency for the top of our cherry Bakewells. Now once these are cool to the touch and just slightly warm, I'm going to pop them out of the trays. Now if you want to, you can use a knife here or some scissors just to neaten up the edges. But I quite like having them look a little bit messy because it makes them look nice and homemade. If you have trouble getting any of them out of the tin, you can just take a teaspoon and just help you get down the sides there and lift them out. So whilst they're cooling a little bit further, I'm then going to grab my glazed cherries and I'm just going to cut these in half. Perfect. So I'm now just going to spread these out once they're cool to touch so that they sit nice and flat on a surface. And then I'm going to take a teaspoon and grab a little bit of our topping here and then just spoon that on and spread it out with the back of the spoon. You want to get it right up into the edges if you can, and then you can just sort of shake it out a little bit, just like that, to give you a nice smooth finish. So a teaspoonful for the top, spread it out a bit and then shake. And before this starts to set, you want to pop your cherry on the top there. I think I put way too much on that one. But what's good about this icing is that it's very forgiving if you just shake it off. You can also get it closer to the edges by sort of chucking it downwards a bit. And there you have your homemade cherry Bakewell tarts. Thanks again so much for joining us today, and I really hope you enjoyed the bake. Don't forget to share your photos of your bake and tag us at Bakewell Being. We hope that when you look at your gorgeous little cherry Bakewell tart that you feel a level of accomplishment, and you should feel proud of yourself, especially if you've tried to challenge yourself today with a bake that you haven't made before or something that you might feel is slightly out of your comfort zone, because you did that with your own hands completely from scratch. So show it off and join us back here next week for another Bakewell Being tutorial.